everyone. This is Grandmaster Ben Finegold. It's September 8th, 2020, unfortunately. And today's lecture is on Adolf Anderssen. And just like Magnus Carlsen, he has a lot more names. Now, if you go to Wikipedia and you type in Magnus Carlsen, he has a lot more names than that. And I've only heard of Adolf Anderssen as Adolf Anderssen. However, he's also Carl Ernst Adolf Anderssen. Okay, when he played Kieseritzky in a game we're going to look at, that guy has like 12 names. So I guess Alejandro Ramirez is feeling bad now. Now, Adolf Anderssen, as you can see on your screen, I hope, was born 1818 and died 1879. And it says he was a German chess master, but he wasn't born in Germany. So I guess he played for Germany. But he was born in Prussia, so that was very exciting for Mr. Burns, I guess, because he likes to talk about Prussia, which later became Poland. And then when there were wars, his gravestone was destroyed, and they had to give him a new one. Anyway, Anderssen, for me, is known for one thing, and for you, he's known for two things. Okay, for you, he's known for the Immortal game and the Evergreen game. Those are his two famous games. Although one of them, I think, was a casual game. Like, it wasn't even a tournament. They were just like, hey, let's play. And I think the other one was a tournament. And basically, that's how he's known today. He's known to me as the link from Morphy to Steinitz. And in my opinion, he was the strongest player who played a lot of games against both of them. And he actually played matches with them. The matches with Steinitz were for the World Championship, which he lost close match. And lifetime score against Steinitz was pretty close. Morphy, he played a match and didn't do very well. But since this is an Anderssen lecture, I'm going to show you a game he beat Morphy, because I don't usually do that. As happened occasionally between 1800 and 1925, and not really after that, he was a pretty strong player when he was older. And, you didn't have to be in your 20s to be the best player in the world back then. Obviously, Steinitz and Lasker were world champions when they were in their 50s. Now, this was a problem Anderssen had, for me, because when he was playing Steinitz, for example, for the world championship in 1866 it was, I think, he was already, a lot older than, than Steinitz by quite a bit, and it was still a close match. The Wikipedia article is quite long. If you've listened to my lectures before, that means you're good when your Wikipedia article is really long. So it talks about all these tournaments he played in. Basically, when Morphy stopped playing chess, which he did pretty early, 1859 or so, then probably Anderssen was the best player in the world who was playing chess until he lost to Steinitz in 66. And he won a lot of these tournaments, and they talk about his match with Steinitz here, where he was, I think, he was already, how could he be he was born in 1818, right? Yeah, okay, so he died when he was 60. So yeah, he was in his late 40s when he played Steinitz, and Steinitz was 30. So I'm not sure what that meant back then, but okay. Anderssen played a lot of the world's best players, not just Steinitz and Morphy. As you all know, Steinitz never played Morphy, although they did meet. But at that point, Morphy had already quit chess. And Steinitz had sort of a so-so record against Anderssen. They were about the same strength. You could argue between 1855 and 1865, Anderssen was better than Steinitz, but probably not after that, because Anderssen was getting pretty old then. But obviously, when Anderssen played Morphy, that didn't go well for Anderssen. Truth hurts. He was a very aggressive player, and one thing that Anderssen did that a lot of people didn't do back then was he made studies and puzzles and such. And one of them is on the right side of the screen here, if you can see that. I'm not sure you can see it. It says from Anderssen's 1842 collection. So you can see that he was, interested in chess not only from a competitive point, but also for making puzzles. Yeah. Okay. Then there's pictures of Staunton and Morphy, who he played. Also, there's a picture of Steinitz, which doesn't look like the pictures of Steinitz that I've seen. So Steinitz was 30 years old in that picture. I'm used to the older Steinitz. So. And then there's Anderssen himself when he was, sort of long in the tooth. But anyway, you can see from his tournament results here on the screen that he played a lot of big tournaments, considering there weren't a lot of big tournaments then. And in 1851, when he won the London tournament, he thought it was too expensive to go, so he was thinking of not going. And then Staunton said he would pay his expenses if he didn't win the tournament, which he did win the tournament. And actually, the prizes were pretty good back then for the top players. So he made some money, and you can see all these tournaments he played in. Match results with very famous players: Kieseritzky, Falkbeer, Lowenthal, Harwitz, Morphy, Max Lang. I know it's Longa, but maybe Kangaroo's not here. And I've heard of almost all of these players, even if some of you guys haven't. Even in 1862, when he played Steinitz for fun, he beat him 2-1. So you can see that Anderssen likely was the best player in the world at some point, and probably for a 15, 20-year period, he was easily top 5 in the world. So incredibly strong player. Now, go over to another Wikipedia page. I have a Wikipedia page about me. It's about 2 lines long. It says, Ben Finegold is a chess grandmaster, the end. And Anderssen not only has a long Wikipedia page, he has Wikipedia pages about individual games. The Immortal game and the Evergreen game, which we are going to look at. And I think the Immortal game was played for fun. It wasn't even a serious game. So now, if I analyze these games with an engine, then everybody's going to choke on their own rage. But the point of it isn't to analyze with an engine. The point is to see the beautiful combinations and the imagination. And a lot of that doesn't happen today because people want to play perfectly and win all their games. They don't necessarily want to play interesting games. They want to play games where they win. Now, if you're a low-rated player, like most of you, you don't have to play perfect every move. You can make the game interesting so it's exciting for everybody. Spectators will watch, stuff like that. So some of the games back then were like that, where they made a lot of sacrifices. They weren't necessarily sound, but these things happen. Okay, so we're gonna do a new share, and then hopefully this will work. I'm not sure if that worked, but something. All right, so can you guys see the chessboard now? Can somebody say something?
Yes, it looks good.
It looks good? That doesn't make any sense. Yeah. I must have made a mistake. Okay, so this is his game with Kieseritzky. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. And he had a lot of names, so there you go. And this is, if we, let's see, what did I want to say? Oh yeah, I'm sorry. The 2 famous games that he played, the Immortal game and the Evergreen game. So this is, the Immortal game is the game with Kieseritzky, and the Evergreen game is with a guy that I've barely heard of, Dufresne, which we'll look at later. So, okay, so Anderssen was white, which was the style at the time. If you won a very famous, brilliant attacking game, it's very likely you were white, very likely. And the obvious exception, which I'm sure you're all dying to say, is the game Paulson-Morphy, where Morphy was black, but most of the brilliancy is with white. Okay, so Anderssen's white, and he's playing the King's Gambit because it's 1851. So, you know how it is, which is very exciting. Bishop c4. Now let's see if you guys in the chat are paying attention. There's a very, very strong grandmaster who in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s would occasionally play the King's Gambit. We'll get that in editing. And instead of the obvious knight to f3, which is very common, This grandmaster played bishop c4. Which grandmaster was this? Who knows? Does anybody know?
Was it Nigel Short?
Nigel Short's close because he has played the King's Gambit. So that's close. This person played the King's Gambit often. Somebody just said it.
Susan Polgar?
Yeah, Susan Polgar. Well, Susan Polgar, you're half right. You got the Polgar right, but I said a very, very strong grandmaster, and you named a very average grandmaster. Okay, so the correct answer is Judith Polgar, the one who's actually good. Okay, so Judith Polgar was top 10 in the world, and before she was top 10 in the world, she played the King's Gambit, and she played bishop c4, even though knight f3 is more common. Also, occasionally, Kasparov makes a chess comeback where he plays blitz or bullet or 960 or some nonsense. And actually, Kasparov played bishop c4 in the King's Gambit once against Karyakin, but I think they both lost. I think the whole world was destroyed. Now, the problem with bishop c4 is it allows queen h4 check. However, if you play queen h4 check, eventually white's going to play knight f3 and attack your queen. So that queen's sort of silly there. So it's a double-edged sword. Queen h4 was played, king f1, and white's going to gain a tempo by playing knight f3, and why is black's queen there, and why can't white castle? As my dad used to say, both sides stand badly. Okay, b5, which is a very suspicious move. The idea is white sacrificed a pawn, so black sacrifices a pawn to get white's bishop off of f7 on this silly square. And if white plays bishop b3, black can get his bishop out. b5 is not a move I would recommend. So, okay, he took, and they developed their pieces. The queen's attacked. The queen defends the f-pawn. White wants to play d4 and take the f-pawn, but the f-pawn's already defended. So queen h6 makes sense. Yeah, knight h5, that's not my kind of chess move. But again, it was 1851. This move has two obvious reasons. It defends the f-pawn again, and knight g3 check could be annoying. See, because there's a pin here and a fork and so forth. So knight h5 playing for tricks, but tricks are for kids. Knight h4, a move I would never consider. Okay, now that stops knight g3, and also, I guess Anderssen was a big follower of me because he wants to play knight f5. So knight h4 is a very strange move, but it does stop knight g3 check. So, queen g5 attacking the knight, knight f5. Now, before this lecture, I wanted to do a lot of deep preparation, and so I wanted to find a super GM that had some analysis on the games, that knew something about them. It turns out Anish Giri had studied this a lot, and he was very confused at this point. Giri said the game should have continued knight f3, queen h6, knight h4, queen g5. He was very puzzled that that didn't happen. Okay, Giri was like, why are these guys not playing for a draw? Now, obviously, not only are we threatening the knight, but the bishop is also hanging. So that refuted, what Giri was saying. So knight f5 is forced. That way you save both pieces. c6 threatening the bishop. g4 threatening the knight, recommended by Matt Larson. And you can't take en passant because it was 1851. So there was no en passant. How many of you guys believe what I'm saying? Probably about half of you, right? Okay. Now there was en passant, but the bishop would take the queen. So you can't take en passant because you'd lose your queen. Okay. So he played knight f6. Rook g1 defending the pawn, sacrificing his bishop on b5. He took the bishop, and the queen is sort of trapped. And unlike nowadays, the best players in the world are very rarely giving their pieces away willy-nilly. They want to see like a forced mate. In 1851, if you had a big attack, you would give pieces and pawns away, and you just start attacking. The only person now who does something similar would be Dubov. Dubov plays super aggressively for somebody who's like number 20 in the world. So, this might be good for white, But if it's not good for white, he lost his bishop. But people back then, they wanted to attack. They didn't care so much. Okay, queen g6, h5. The queen only has one square. Queen f3. Now we want to take this pawn, winning a pawn and trapping the queen. Knight g8, setting up for the next game. But the actual reason was he needs some retreat squares from his queen, so bishop f4 doesn't win. And I mean, you'd like to play bishop d6 defending your pawn, but you can't do that. So there really isn't a way to defend your pawn, so you just got an escape for his queen. Knight c3. And obviously, I mean, white has tremendous compensation for a piece. I mean, white has everything. Black looks like he just started the game. He's got his queen on f6. Everything else is on the back row. White is down a piece, but I mean, white has all his pieces out. Knight d5 is coming. This looks great for white to me. Bishop c5 attacking the rook. Knight d5 attacking the queen. Queen b2. Okay, and generally, the reasons games from 50, 100, and 150 years ago, or in this case more, are famous is because people did something very interesting that maybe shouldn't have worked. Maybe there was a better move, and it did work, usually because their opponent helped them. All right, so if two engines were playing, you wouldn't see games like this because the engines would be like, no, come on, you can't, that's ridiculous. Okay, and this is the first move of the game where white played a move that looks pretty silly. And it's considered like the greatest move ever played. I would never think of this move because this rook is attacked and this rook is attacked. And I don't like to lose all my pieces. Unless I'm playing 10-second chess, then I insist. Okay, so he played bishop to d6. And the reason is he's trying to trap that king. He wants to get that king. So black can take the bishop, take the rook, or take this rook, and he made a bad decision. I want to show you one funny variation. If he takes the rook with check, which he didn't do, and then takes this rook, we play knight g7 check. This is the whole point of the combination, is the queen that was on f6 and b2 and a1 was defending this g7 square. Now it's not. And then after here, we have mate in one. Who can tell me the mate in one? Somebody like unmute themselves and tell me the move. That way I know you can hear me.
Bishop d7.
Yeah, that's close enough.
Bishop c7.
Yeah, but that's what he meant. Right, although he might have meant that. But right, bishop c7 mate. Okay, now that didn't happen because black saw that. He's like, why don't I get mated? Okay, now what black could have done, according to, chess scholars, is not taken this rook and just play queen b2 and said, well, you can't play knight g7 now. My queen on b2 is defending it. Okay, and this would have been the proper way for black to play. And people like, I don't know, Raj, they're like, oh, my engine says this and my engine says that. If you look at the games from the 1800s, unless it's Morphy taking some guy out back, the engine's not going to like it. Now, some Morphy games, which I've analyzed on chess.com, they're getting scores like 99. So he played okay. But when the game has a lot of sacrifices and the game was played 150 years ago, don't use your engine because then, the truth hurts. Okay, so in this position, I don't know what's going on. But obviously, black has some difficulties because of his development situation. Okay, he took the rook on g1. Now this, to me, is easily the best move of the game. I'm not saying it's even a good move. The engine might say it's a bad move, but it's the best move of the game. Because when Anderssen played bishop d6, he wanted to play this checkmate that I showed you, but obviously he can't with the queen on b2. So what move did Anderssen make to block the queen's defense of g7? Who can unmute themselves and tell me?
Pawn e5.
That's right. Whoever said that was right. You're all correct.
Too fast.
What's that? Pawn to e5, that is correct. That blocks the queen. Okay, also it cements the bishop on, okay. All right, and the most important thing about the move isn't what I say. The most important thing is it gives another rook away with check. That's exciting. So he took with check, king e2. Okay, now white's down 2 rooks, but black's king doesn't look very good. Okay, and the player with black, Kieseritzky, he saw knight g7, bishop c7 mate, just like I showed you. So he stopped it with knight a6. Notice how he stopped it, because I said so. Okay, so knight g7 anyway, king d8. Now, white played a brilliant move, winning the game. Forced checkmate in 2 moves. Who can unmute themselves and find it? White to play and win.
Queen f6, check, knight takes f6, bishop e7 mate.
That is correct. That's what happened. The knight is defending e7, so he plays queen f6 check. Now the knight's not going to defend e7. Knight e7 allows 2 checkmates, confusing the audience. So he took and then mate. And I don't want to give the next game away, but Anderssen liked bishop e7 mate, if you know what I mean. Okay, now this is a famous game because these are 2 well-known players. These players are known throughout the world as being top players, and white sacrificed a queen and 2 rooks to give mate. And if you look at super grandmasters today, and they're playing each other, who's going to sacrifice a queen and 2 rooks for mate? The answer is fries. That doesn't happen today. Now, there's 2 reasons that doesn't happen. People don't want to sacrifice all their pieces now. We like to be ahead pieces. And the other reason is, if white has mate in 1, or mate in 2, or mate in 3, or whatever, you know, super grandmasters today see that, so they defend against that. So if this game was played today at the top level, black wouldn't be playing all these illogical defensive moves that let white have this brilliant mate. But still, that's good for us, because you know, it's a nice checkmate. And that's the way Anderssen liked to play. Super aggressive, sacrifice, attacking. And if you calculate better than your opponent, you don't have to play like an engine. Okay? It's the famous saying. If you and your friend meet a bear, you don't have to outrun the bear. You just have to outrun your friend. Okay? It's the same thing in chess. You don't have to play better than the engine. You have to calculate and play better than your opponent. So if it's super complicated and you're good at calculation, your opponent's not as good, you can win positions even when you shouldn't, because, you know, the bear can't catch you. Okay, let's go to another game. I don't know how to go to another game, but I will. Let's see. All right, and then I have to close this. I'm not even sure if you guys can see the new board or not. Somebody has to help me. You guys see a pawn on e4? Anybody? No?
No.
All right, I can fix that easily. Let's see. See, I told you I could. You thought I was lying. Did I fix
we got
yet?
it.
Yeah. I can fix everything except combination to safe. Okay, so this was played the next year, but this was, I think, actually played in a chess tournament. That last game was for fun. Okay, now this game I like more because I think it's prettier in the end. Also, if you go to the internet, there's a huge argument as to how this game ended. Why didn't they keep perfect score sheets from 170 years ago? Okay, so when we get to the end of the game, there's 3 possible endings depending on what book you read. And also, there's a 4th ending, which is, that didn't happen, the guy resigned. We're not going to look at that ending. I don't want to see that one. I want to see the endings that could have happened, not the guy resigned. Terrible. Okay, so Anderssen's white, and he played knight f3 this game. And he played a gambit that was very popular in 1852. Can somebody guess? What's that?
Pawn b4.
That's right. Pawn b4. That's the Evans gambit. And Anderssen played the Evans gambit a lot. Okay, then he sacks a pawn. and he gets a big center. Hooray for big center. And then black takes the pawn. We want to take back, but it's illegal. So then you don't do that. So you castle. Now, because of the games that were played in the 19th century, there's a lot of analysis about this. And if you're a grandmaster and you play black in the Gioco Piano Italian game, Evans Gambit, you should be reeling off all of your preparation, and you've analyzed all these games. You know how to defend for black. But these guys didn't have that. They had to figure out on their own what to do. And some positions are easier to play for one side, irrespective of what the engine says. And in fact, the engine was broken in 1852. It took them like 125 years to fix it, and it still wasn't working very well. Okay, so he played d3, which is a move I don't know. Okay, I know about taking the pawn, which I think is bad, and I know about bishop b6 and queen e7 and knight f6, but to d3, I don't know about that move. Very suspicious. And obviously, games that were played a long time ago, people needed to learn how to get their king safe. And in this position, white's king is perfectly safe, and black's king is not. So. Okay, queen b3, typical move in this variation, threatening f7. Queen f6. Sometimes they go to e7, sometimes they go to f6. Problem with e7 is bishop a3 looks pretty annoying. So it's not easy to play black in this position unless you've memorized tons of games and tons of theory, which obviously wasn't the case in 1852. Okay, e5 attacking the queen, queen g6, rook e1, knight e7 is what I would do, bishop a3, and I don't see a reason not to castle. There must be one, I just don't see one. I'm not really a big fan of black's position because I don't really like any of these pieces at all. I don't like any of them. I'm not even a big fan of where the queen is either, that can get attacked. I do like white's, queen and bishops attacking here. This pawn's annoying. This knight has easy development. I don't like black's position. Okay, he played b5 just like in the last game. Okay, very suspicious. I'm not a fan of that move. Queen takes b5, queen a4. So black got a really active rook. He got squares for his bishop, and he gave up a pawn to do it. But I don't really see anything long-term for black. That just seemed like he gave one of his pawns back. So I'm not a fan of that. Obviously, if somebody lost a game, they must have done something wrong. I don't like d3. I don't like b5. So I already like white. Bishop b6. Bishop's good on b6. I like the bishop on b6. Knight d2 makes sense, developing the knight. Bishop b7. So considering this was 1852, both sides got all their minor pieces out. Although black didn't castle, otherwise this game wouldn't be famous. Okay, knight e4, queen f5. Okay, and now white went totally bananas and bonkers. Okay, don't analyze with your engine, don't do it. Probably the right move is knight g3, and that makes queen f5 look pretty silly. Queen f5 doesn't make any sense. Like, why are you're going to move your queen again and again and again? I mean, what is this, an Alice in Chains song? So that move doesn't make any sense. But this was 1852. This is a famous game. Anderssen was known to sacrifice for an attack, so it's very unlikely he's going to play knight g3. Okay, I would, because always retreat. But okay. He played bishop takes d3, which makes sense. Always retreat. Queen h5. Again, knight g3 is really strong, and he played knight f6 check, as was the style at the time. Somebody tried to say something. What? Ooh. Anyone? Yeah, knight g3 is annoying because the queen's virtually trapped there. Terrible. Okay, so queen f5 was terrible. Queen h5 was terrible. Anderssen decided to punish his opponent, which he did punish his opponent, but maybe he shouldn't have. But all right. So takes. Now we got this, big attack here. Rook G8, black attacks also. Also good. Rook A D1, and now Rook A D1 is a brilliant move as far as the calculation of the variation, but it doesn't work if black plays perfectly, which makes sense. I mean, if people are sacrificing all their pieces and their opponent's playing perfectly, that's not going to work out usually. But if your opponent makes one mistake, you can get a big attack. And here, black made a terrible blunder. Now, if I was giving chess lessons to the guy with black, I would say, your opponent is one of the top 5 players in the world. Some people think he's the best in the world. So when he plays Rook A D1 and you think you could get away with Queen takes knight, that means you think he blundered horribly or you're missing something. Now, if Queen takes knight was a good move, then probably you're not playing the best player in the world. They probably wouldn't allow Queen takes knight. You see what I'm saying? So you should be like, wait a minute, why is my opponent doing that? What am I missing? And according to what I read on the internet, and the internet's always right, Queen H3 is the move, which also threatens mate on G2, but defends the king. It defends D7, which you'll see why is important later. And I don't know if white's doing well here or not. I think white's not doing well. All right, so queen takes F3 is good for us because we came here to see Anderssen win brilliantly. We didn't come here to see a guy we never heard of win. All right, so what move did Anderssen play in this position? Make sure you unmute yourself so I'm less confused.
Queen takes C6.
Queen takes C6, that's too... See, queen takes C6, you're getting rid of the defender of this knight.
Yeah, and then rook takes C7.
Right. The problem with queen C6 is... Well, wait. If I take it, and you play rook takes or bishop takes, what are you doing? I mean, I'm threatening mate here. So that's... this probably not enough. Need more queens. Too much bug house. But you have the right idea. You just didn't sacrifice enough.
Sack the exchange first.
Always sack the exchange. Right. Okay. And that's why white played rook a d1. So if the king goes here, we got some things lined up against that. Obviously, king here is very dangerous because there's a bishop on a3, so he took it. And now we see the real reason white played rook to d1. Anyone? Yeah, exactly.
And then bishop to f5.
Queen takes d7. You can't play king f8 because you take that with mate. Bishop f5 is double check. Let me make sure. Yep, double check. I double checked. Okay, now some sources say black resigned here, but that didn't happen because I said so. One source says the game ended king c6, checkmate. Boo, boo. That's a boring checkmate. I don't like that. It's a little exciting because white gave all his pieces away. All right. So king e8 was probably played. Bishop d7 check. Now, some guy on the internet said, I've seen this position in 45 books, and 23 books say black played king d8, and 23 books says he played king f8, or 20, whatever the number was. So there's no agreement. And it's also possible, since it was 1852, that white announced a mate, and nothing really was played. He's just like, I win, game's over. So, all right. But what I'm using says this is the end of the game. That's checkmate. But this is the mate that I saw when I was a little kid. So we're going to go with that because when I was a little kid, this game impressed me. Okay. So as you can see, Anderssen wasn't scared to sacrifice all of his pieces, especially when it led to a beautiful mate. Notice black is also threatening mate. Scary. So I think Anderssen was a great calculator, and even if it wasn't working, his opponent would mess up and he would outcalculate them and win anyway. And I mean, obviously, if the guy's top 5 in the world and he's sacking all his pieces, he's going to be right a lot. And in those games, obviously, black didn't castle and get his king safe and paid the price. Now, the last game I'm going to show you is totally the opposite. Okay? It's a long, strategical end game where he beats the very famous Paul Morphy. Okay, and before I get there, I have to, gotta do something. I gotta go new share. Let's see, Morphy, there we go. And then we're gonna close. All right, now you guys can see that white played A3 on move 1. Somebody tell me if it's true. Anybody?
Yep.
Hooray, it's the Perrier attack. Okay, now, some books call A3 Anderssen's opening because Anderssen, in this match with Morphy, played it 3 times. Anderssen had 1 win, 1 loss, and 1 draw with A3. So that's pretty good. And there's nothing wrong with A3. A3 is a fine move. Okay? And what they did was they transposed into an English and a reverse Sicilian. And I'm assuming, Anderssen thought Morphy was a great attacking player, and maybe he had a lot of good openings with black, so he would just take him out of all that and just play. And after E5, he played C4, and they actually played a Sicilian in reverse, which we can see this today. Okay, so, basically it's a Sicilian, but Morphy has white instead of black, but Morphy's down to tempo, because Morphy has the black pieces. So this looks like a normal opening now, but A3 was unusual at the time. Still unusual. Okay, and they developed their pieces. Pretty good. Morphy didn't get mated in 10 moves like the other guys. Okay, and he played like Morphy, F5. Rawr. This is just a really interesting positional game where Morphy played on the king side, Anderssen played on the queen side. It looks like a very modern game. This game looks like it was played like 5-10 years ago by grandmasters now. Okay, here comes Morphy, and then F4 blocking it up. And, well, the problem with taking it is I could take with the knight or the bishop, and then that activates my pieces. I would probably take that pawn en passant if I was black, but Morphy decided not to. He played for the attack, and Anderssen stopped queen h4. That would have been annoying. Okay, just like pretty high-level game, I think. Pretty good game. Rook a2, defending on the second rank. And this looks like a game that was just played by grandmasters now. Threatening the pawn on f5. And he goes back and doesn't take it because after takes g6, the bishop has nowhere to go because he played rook e8, so he's defending the e6 square. So that wasn't a good move, bishop e6. Bishop c4, realizing his mistake. So white has 2 bishops. Black has a space advantage with the pawn on e4, but how does black break through? And white's going to play on the queen side eventually. a5, c4, rook b1, and he's defended everything on the king side. There's 2 ways to break through on the king side with pawn breaks. I recommend Spencer's lectures, talks about pawn breaks, h4 and g5. If he wants to play h4, he's going to have to move his rook out of the way, play h5, h4. g5 is obviously a lot easier to play. So they maneuvered around a lot, didn't do anything, and eventually Morphy played for g5. Getting rid of the isolated a-pawn. This has really advanced this idea of playing a4, a5, and taking, because white had an isolated pawn, and now he doesn't. So that was, that's a really nice, and then he has the open a file for his rook. This rook is defending everything, stopping black's attack. This rook's going to infiltrate on the a file. Morphy played g5. and he's trying to break through on the king side, although he's making this bishop look pretty good. And normally when I look at Morphy games, he's spotting the guy a rook, he's checkmating him, he's trash talking. This game is like a long strategical game with somebody who's at his level. Anderssen was, not as good as Morphy, but maybe second or third best in the world. And this isn't a game where somebody's getting mated, although Morphy's trying. Rook A8 check, Rook G8, Queen A4. Really good play from White. White defended his king. White has the two bishops. White got rid of his isolated A-pawn. White has this really nice center. White has this bishop on the diagonal. These pawns are weak. This is a really good game from Anderssen. Okay, and they played an endgame. I must admit, I haven't analyzed a lot of Morphy endgames. Usually, he's getting mated by this point. Okay, now, as I said, Anderssen was a very tactical player, and this game hasn't shown it yet, but now he played sort of a tricky move. In fact, I think if I saw this move, I still wouldn't play it. But it is tricky. C5. You can see how the bishop and king are lined up, so you can't trade on C5, because I take with check, and your bishop's attacked. But you can't lose your bishop, you can't lose your pawn, so he has to play bishop C7. Bishop C4 is good. And, this pawn's isolated and weak. This pawn's backward and weak. Black's pieces are obviously terrible. These are two bishops. Huge advantages for White. Okay, really nice play by Anderssen. Morphy moves his king up. Bishop F8. Now, there was an interesting line here. Yeah. A guy who's like an FM or maybe a weak IM, he did a huge analysis of this game, like pages and pages and pages and pages. And he pointed out something that I would never, ever, ever consider, which may be better for White. And again, if you put engines on the games for hours, they're going to find improvements. But this is really interesting. D5, and the idea is if you take, is not to take back, but to go here, because the knight's defending the bishop, and the bishop's attacking the knight. So you can't just defend your knight, because I'll take the knight and take the bishop. So you have to play knight D6, takes, here, and the knight's trapped. So this is some guy did like a 17-page analysis of this game, and this is one of the variations he found, where this would have been an improvement over what Anderssen did. So D5 would have been interesting. Instead he played bishop F8. Now, if you know me, always play bishop F8, and he's trying to make this rook look silly. Okay, that rook can't move anywhere. So he's sort of trapping, Black's pieces so they can't move anywhere. So I like bishop F8. But maybe the engine likes, D5 more. But now, one thing I talk about when I teach, I used to teach a lot of private students before you guys were born, especially Raj. And one thing I would tell them is, if my student, let's say, was 1,300, there's a good example, and let's say they were playing a 1,500 or 1,600, if my student won, there were two possibilities. One is, the guy he was playing made some horrible blunder, and my student checkmated them in one move. Or my student won their queen, and then he won. Okay? The other, which I thought was better, which is they played around the same strength, and my student just played better and won. See, if I want my students to beat higher rated players, that's how I want them to win. They're playing around the same strength, but my student's just too good. And eventually, they overcome their opponent, which is how you expect a higher rated player to beat a lower rated player. They play and play and play and all right, you're too good. However, if you're rated 2,000, you could lose to a 1,000 player because you hang mate in one, you hang your queen, and you lose. Okay? That happens sometimes. It's rare that a 2,000 player loses to 1,000, says, yeah, that guy's just too good. He outplayed me the whole game. You don't see that too often. So that's one thing I liked about this game, and the reason I'm showing you. Anderssen didn't beat Morphy because Morphy hung mate and won. Morphy didn't hang a queen. Morphy didn't make a move and go, that's the worst move I ever made. This seems like they're playing about the same strength. They're playing about the same ability, but Anderssen's playing better. So that's when you know he's a good player, when you're not sure who has the advantage, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, Anderssen's has the advantage. He's got the better rook, the better pawn structure, the two bishops, and black has trouble moving. That's the way you want to beat a higher rated player, where you're just showing superiority over them. Okay, h5, the same as Anderssen. He wants to trade off his isolated pawn. Okay, and Anderssen's like, all right, I'll take that. By trading all the pawns off, that makes it more likely Morphy can draw because there's no pawns on the board. But that's a passed pawn, so here we go. Put it in H. Always play bishop f1. What a great player, bishop f1, bishop f8. Yeah, this is a tough pawn to take because you gotta watch it over here. Check. Rook here. Now his rook can go here and stop the pawn if necessary. Doubling on the 8th rank, he wants to play h7. Morphy trading all the pieces off. And white just has the passed h-pawn. Now, in this position, it's clear if nothing happens, white's going to win. White's got a pass pawn here, white's got a pass pawn here, white's up a pawn, so Morphy has to get counterplay, and he does. He plays the move f4, and he tries to get his own pass pawn going. See now, if it was black's move, black would be winning easily. So even though Morphy sacrificed a pawn, he's still getting some excellent drawing chances because he's got counterplay himself. And that's why this game is so impressive, because I'd be scared here if I was white. I mean, that's a pretty strong pawn. Okay, but Anderssen had it all under control, stops the pawn, takes, sacrifice the exchange, and white just has too many pawns. I mean, if this pawn pushes, we can't move our rook over there because this pawn's in a queen. So Morphy played king g7. Now he can stop. But there's too many passed pawns. There's too many. So he moves his king up in the endgame, and he makes a really impressive move pretty soon here. Yeah, I was in this position. Anderssen surprised me by playing bishop e6 because that hangs the h-pawn. But he did that on purpose, because if you take the h-pawn, which he didn't do, now our king can walk up, and once our king gets to e7, I can play f5 and defend you can't stop my pawns. So that was actually really interesting, that he sacrificed his pawn so he could move his king up even more. But Morphy didn't allow that. Morphy said, you can't move any of your pawns. No moving pawns. Okay, but too late. Too many. He got his king to e7 anyway. Yeah. And now white's going to play here and here. And if the rook blocks, we got this pawn. So that was already too much. And Morphy resigned. And if you're going to beat the best player in the world, that's a super impressive way to win, by basically equal position, outplaying them, getting a better pawn structure, getting two bishops, having a safer king, and eventually winning a pawn here and there and advancing your passed pawns. And in this position, Morphy resigned because that's too many passed pawns. So a great game by Anderssen. Anderssen clearly was top 5 in the world for at least 15 years. And I think when Morphy retired, Anderssen was the best player in the world. And unfortunately, he lost the close match to Steinitz in 1866. But at that point, he was already a lot older. So, but he's the link, I think, to the best player in the world who played lots of games with both Steinitz and Morphy. Unfortunately, Steinitz never played Morphy. Frankly, terrible. Well, I hope you enjoyed that lecture. I know I did. Remember, the more you watch, the more something. I want to thank our sponsor. We have a sponsor for this lecture, and he has a very unusual name. His name is Anonymous. Okay, a lot of our sponsors have that name, and they're all different. Common name. So we want to thank our anonymous sponsor for sponsoring the Adolf Anderssen lecture. And we also want to thank another person who may or may not want to be anonymous for donating two class viewings for two of you right now. That was very nice of him as well. And we like when people support chess and we have these lectures. Please like and subscribe here on the YouTube channel. You can go to my YouTube channel, like and subscribe, and watch the Twitch channels of me and Karen. We have separate Twitch channels. We're the best. All right, let's see if we have some great chat here. Let's see. Yay. I got donated. Hooray. Hooray for donations. All right, see you guys next time. Bye.